When was the last time life actually tested you? Not inconvenienced you, not frustrated you, tested you. The kind of test where the thing you have been using to hold yourself together, the routine, the optimism, the sense that things generally work out, suddenly is not enough. Where you reach for the tools you have always used and find nothing there. Most people, when that moment comes, are completely unprepared for it. And here is the hard truth about that. The time to train your mind is not when life is falling apart. It is right now, before the diagnosis, before the loss, before the failure that redefines everything, before the moment that splits your life into a before and an after. The Stoics understood this with a clarity that still feels uncomfortable to read. They did not wait for hard times to develop a philosophy of hard times. They trained in the good years, so the hard years did not break them. They built the mind the way a soldier builds the body, not when the war starts, long before it. Today I'll show you 6 trainings the Stoics used to build a mind that life cannot break, and I'll walk you through how each one applies to the ordinary days you are living right now, before the test arrives. Part 1. The Unprepared Mind. The Stoics taught that a mind that has never been built is a mind that will not hold, and that the difference between the man who survives hardship and the man who is destroyed by it is not circumstance but preparation. There is a man worth knowing about here. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, better known as Caligula, Emperor of Rome at 25. Beloved at first, genuinely celebrated. The people of Rome called him a gift. Within 3 years he had descended into a kind of madness that historians still argue about, whether the madness was always there, or whether power brought it out, or whether a serious illness early in his reign broke something in him. Nobody knows for certain. But what is clear is this: he had never trained his mind. He had been given everything: wealth, status, power, adoration. And he had never once been asked to develop the internal resources to hold any of it. When difficulty came, there was nothing inside him to hold it with. Now consider Marcus Aurelius, who became emperor at around the same age, who faced wars, plagues, betrayals, the deaths of his own children, a crumbling empire, who, by every external measure, had a harder reign than almost any emperor before or after him, and who remained to the end himself, recognizably, stubbornly, quietly himself. The difference was not intelligence. It was not circumstance. It was preparation. Marcus had spent years, long before the throne, long before the weight of an empire, deliberately training his mind, reading the Stoics, writing to himself, practicing the disciplines, building something inside that could hold up under pressure, because it had been built under pressure. That is what this is about. Not philosophy as an intellectual exercise. Philosophy as preparation, as the building of a mind that life cannot break. Part 2. What it means to break. The Stoics taught that breaking is not a sudden collapse, but a slow drift away from the person you used to be, and that most people are already breaking long before they recognize it. Most people picture breaking as something dramatic, a collapse, a breakdown, a visible falling apart. It is usually much quieter than that. Breaking looks like this. It looks like becoming someone you do not recognize. The person who used to handle hard things with some grace, who now snaps at the people they love. The person who used to have a clear sense of what they valued, who now just reacts to whatever the loudest voice in the room is saying. The person who used to be able to sit with uncertainty, who now needs constant distraction to keep from feeling it. That is what breaking looks like. Not a sudden collapse. A slow drift away from yourself. Seneca wrote about this with painful accuracy. He said that the most powerful person is the one who has himself in his own power. Most powerful, not richest, not most influential, not most talented. The person who has himself in his own power, when life puts pressure on you, and it will, it always does, It does not ask permission, and it does not give warnings. The question is whether you have yourself in your own power, or whether the pressure does. Whether the difficulty gets to decide who you are and how you act and what you become. Or whether something in you holds, that something, that ability to remain yourself under pressure, is not given to you. It is built, deliberately, daily, over time. And the building starts long before you need it. Part 3. The first training, voluntary discomfort. The Stoics taught that a mind kept in comfort loses the ability to meet difficulty, and that the deliberate practice of discomfort is the first and most important training a person can do. This is where it gets practical, and where most people, even the ones who like the ideas, start to quietly drift away, because the first training the Stoics prescribed is not comfortable. It is not a meditation app or a morning journal, though those have their place. It is something more demanding than that. They called it voluntary discomfort. The deliberate, regular practice of doing hard things when you do not have to, not because you enjoy suffering. The Stoics were not masochists. They prescribed it because they understood what comfort does to a mind over time if it is never interrupted. Comfort is not neutral. A mind that is never challenged, never cold, never hungry, never without the thing it is used to having, that mind is slowly, quietly losing the ability to cope with difficulty. It is atrophying. The way a muscle atrophies when you stop using it. Seneca practiced this his whole life. He was wealthy, very wealthy, one of the richest men in Rome, and he would regularly spend days living as if he had nothing. Rough food, uncomfortable conditions, no servants, no luxuries, none of the things that ordinarily made his life comfortable, and he would ask himself, at the end of those days, whether this was the thing he had been afraid of. Almost always, the answer was no. The thing he had been unconsciously afraid of, the loss, the discomfort, the having less, turned out to be survivable, more than survivable. Fine, that is the point of voluntary discomfort. Not the suffering itself. What it does to your relationship with suffering. It turns the thing you fear into something familiar, something you have already met, something you know you can handle, because you have already handled it, by choice, in practice. The Stoics called this the pre-practice of difficulty, and it is the reason people who have been through hard things voluntarily, who have trained in discomfort on purpose, tend to handle involuntary hardship better than people who have never been tested at all. They have already been there. They know the terrain. Part 4. The second training. What you tell yourself. The Stoics taught that the event itself is almost never what breaks a person, and that what breaks a person is the meaning he attaches to the event. The Stoics were obsessed with what we would now call self-talk. Not in the modern affirmation poster sense. In a much harder, more honest sense, they were obsessed with the stories we tell ourselves about what is happening to us. They understood, and this was a radical idea for their time, that the event itself is almost never what breaks a person. What breaks a person is the meaning they attach to the event. Epictetus was the clearest about this. He said that people are disturbed not by things, but by the opinions they have about things. Not the things. The opinions about the things. Your business failing is an event. The story you tell yourself about what it means, that you are a failure, that you were foolish to try, that everyone was right to doubt you, that story is a choice. You are making it. It does not feel like a choice, especially in the middle of it. It feels like the obvious truth of the situation. But it is a choice, and you can make a different one. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to intercept those stories before they settled in. He would catch himself starting to spiral into a narrative. This is terrible. This means this. This proves that. And he would ask whether it was actually true. What is the fact here, stripped of everything I have added to it? What actually happened, Without the meaning I am already wrapping around it. What actually happened is almost always smaller than the story about it. A door closed. Someone said no. A plan did not work. Those are events, small ones in the grand scale. It is the story. The "this always happens to me." The "I knew it would not work." The "everyone else seems to manage this fine," that inflates them into something big enough to break you. The second training is learning to catch the story before it catches you. To hold it up, look at it directly, and ask whether it is true, whether it is useful, whether it is the story you would choose to tell if you were thinking clearly. Most of the time, it is not. And you can write a different one. Part 5. The third training. Show up when it does not matter. The Stoics taught that character is built in the small moments when nobody is watching, and that the man you are in the dark is the only real version of you. There is a principle that runs through all of Stoic practice that does not get talked about enough. And it is this: how you do the small things is how you will do the big things. Not as a motivational slogan, as a literal, practical observation about how character works, about how the mind gets built. Every day you have dozens of opportunities to practice the person you say you want to be when it counts. The email you write carefully when a careless one would have been fine. The conversation you show up for fully when half present would have been acceptable. The work you do with integrity when nobody would have noticed the shortcut. The reaction you choose deliberately when a reflexive one would have gone unchallenged. None of those moments feel important. That is exactly why they are. Marcus Aurelius understood this. The private journals he kept, which became meditations, were not written for an audience. They were not a performance. They were a man holding himself to a standard in the dark, when nobody was watching, because he understood that the person you are in the dark is the only real version of you. The public version is easy. The private version is the one that either holds or breaks when life gets serious. Epictetus put it plainly. He said that if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to externals. Do not wish to seem knowledgeable. Just do the right thing. Right now, even when it is small, even when no one sees it. The training is not the grand gesture. The training is the 1,000 small moments before the grand gesture ever arrives. When the real test comes, and it will come, it always comes, you will not rise to the occasion. You will fall to the level of your training. What you built will hold, or it will not, based on what you built when the stakes were low enough that you could have gotten away with not building it at all. That is the window. Right now. The ordinary days. The low-stakes moments. The mornings when nothing is on fire and nobody is watching. This is when the mind gets made. Part 6. The fourth training. Sit with uncertainty. The Stoics taught that the mind which cannot sit inside not knowing is a mind that will be ruled by anxiety, and that learning to remain functional in uncertainty is one of the most valuable capacities a person can build. Most people have never learned to be comfortable with not knowing. Not just big uncertainty. Whether the business will work, whether the relationship will last, whether the thing you are building will amount to anything. Small daily uncertainty too. The unreturned message. The meeting that might mean something or might mean nothing. The outcome of a decision already made that cannot be undone. The 1,000 small open loops that modern life keeps running in the background. All day, every day, quietly draining the battery. Most people cannot sit with any of it. They need resolution. They need to know. And when they cannot know, which is most of the time, because life is mostly not knowing, they fill the gap with anxiety, with speculation, with the exhausting mental habit of running scenarios, calculating outcomes, trying to think their way to a certainty that does not exist yet and might never exist. The Stoics trained themselves to do something different. They trained themselves to be comfortable inside the uncertainty. not to resolve it, not to make peace with it from a distance. To actually sit inside it, fully, and remain functional, remain themselves. Marcus Aurelius called this accepting the nature of things. Everything in life, he observed, is in process. Nothing is finished, nothing is settled. The universe is constant motion, events unfolding, situations developing, outcomes still being decided. Fighting that reality, demanding it resolve itself on your timeline, is like standing in a river and demanding it stop moving. The river does not care, it keeps moving, and you exhaust yourself standing against it while it goes right around you. The training here is deceptively simple. When uncertainty shows up, and it will today, probably in the next few hours, instead of immediately reaching for resolution, practice staying with it. Just a little longer than is comfortable. Notice the urge to check, to ask, to calculate, to resolve, and do not act on it right away. That pause, that ability to remain inside the not knowing without being destroyed by it, that is one of the most valuable capacities a mind can have. Life, especially at its hardest, is full of long stretches where nothing is resolved and nothing is clear, and you have to keep moving anyway. The people who can do that, who have trained for it on purpose, in the small uncertainties, before the large ones arrive, those people do not break. They move through. Part 7. The 5th training, learn to lose well. The Stoics taught that you will lose everything you have, and that the only question worth asking is not how to avoid the loss, but how to meet it without being destroyed by it. You are going to lose things. You already have. You will again. Not as a pessimistic prediction, as the most reliable fact about a human life. You will lose people. You will lose opportunities. You will lose versions of yourself you were attached to. You will lose things you built, things you loved, things you were certain you could not survive without. The question, the one the Stoics kept returning to with a seriousness that makes most modern self-help look like small talk, is not how to avoid that. It is how to lose well. Epictetus had a practice he gave his students that sounds almost cruel until you understand what it is actually doing. He told them to hold everything they loved loosely, not to stop loving, to love with an open hand instead of a closed fist. When you embrace your child, he said, and remember, he was saying this to people who lived in an era of high child mortality, people for whom this was not abstract. Say to yourself, I love a mortal. I have been given this for now, not forever. Not to diminish the love, to protect the person doing the loving. Here is what a closed-fist relationship with the things you love actually does to you. It turns love into anxiety. It turns gratitude into possessiveness. It turns the simple joy of having something into the constant low-grade terror of losing it. You stop experiencing the thing and start guarding it. And when it goes, as everything eventually goes, the loss is compounded by shock, by the sense that this was not supposed to happen, that the universe broke some agreement you believed it had made with you. The universe made no such agreement. Seneca wrote that we should prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. Balance the books each day. Close the loop tonight. Tell the person you love that you love them, not because something bad might happen, but because it is true right now, and right now is what is real. Do the work today with full effort, not because tomorrow is not coming, but because today is the only day you actually have. Learning to lose well does not make loss hurt less. Nothing does, but it changes your relationship with what you have while you have it. It makes you hold it more fully, more presently, more honestly, because you have stopped pretending it is permanent. And when the loss comes, as it will, the mind you have trained holds, not without grief, but without breaking. Part 8. The 6th training. Pressure is the point. The Stoics taught that difficulty is not the interruption of the journey, but the road itself. and that the mind only grows under the weight of the very thing most people spend their lives trying to avoid. Most people quietly believe that difficulty is an interruption, that the hard times are the detour, that the real journey, the smooth, progressive, things going according to plan version of your life, is what was supposed to happen, and the difficulty is what got in the way of it. It is not. The Stoics were almost aggressive about this. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action advances action, and that what stands in the way becomes the way. What stands in the way becomes the way. Not a consolation, not a reframe for people who need to feel better about their circumstances. A practical observation about how growth actually works, about how the mind actually gets built. You do not develop patience in comfortable circumstances. You develop it in the moments when everything in you wants to give up and you do not. You do not develop resilience in easy seasons. You develop it in the seasons that ask more of you than you thought you had. You do not discover what you are made of when things go well. You discover it, only ever discover it when they do not. This means the difficulties you are facing right now, or have faced or will face, they are not obstacles to the training. They are the training. The Stoics had a name for this. They called it the obstacle as teacher. The idea that every difficult thing that happens to you is, among other things, an opportunity to practice the mind you are building, an opportunity to apply the disciplines, test the training, find the gaps. And if you do not yet have the disciplines to meet it, if the difficulty arrives before you are ready, that too is information. That too is the universe telling you where the work is. Seneca wrote that fire tests gold, and that suffering tests brave men, not destroys them, tests them. A test by definition reveals something, what holds and what does not, what was real and what was performance. The training is not a shield against difficulty. It is the thing that makes difficulty useful, that turns what could break you into what builds you instead. That takes the pressure life will inevitably apply and makes it the point rather than the problem. Embrace the pressure, not because it is fun, because it is the only forge available. Train your mind now before life breaks you down. Stoicism, Part 9, the 7th training. Watch where your mind goes. The Stoics taught that a man becomes whatever his thoughts return to most often, and that the mind left unwatched will drift toward the very things that weaken it. There is a line in Marcus Aurelius that is easy to read past and almost impossible to forget once you actually sit with it. He wrote that the soul takes on the color of its thoughts. The color of its thoughts. Not its circumstances, not its possessions, not the opinions of the people around it. Its thoughts. Whatever the mind dwells on, repeatedly, deliberately or not, that is what the mind slowly becomes. Most people have never once examined where their mind goes when they are not directing it. And the truth, if they looked, would unsettle them, because the unwatched mind does not drift toward gratitude. It does not drift toward the people who love it, or the work that fulfills it, or the quiet good of an ordinary afternoon. The unwatched mind drifts toward grievance, toward comparison, toward the thing it does not have, and the person who wronged it, and the future that might go badly, and the past that should have gone differently. That is the default. Left alone, the mind runs downhill, and downhill for a mind is always toward the things that make it smaller. The Stoics understood this better than almost anyone, because they were not naive about human nature. They did not believe the mind was naturally good, or naturally peaceful, or naturally inclined toward wisdom. They believed the mind was a tool that did whatever you trained it to do, and that if you did not train it, it would train itself badly on whatever the world happened to throw at it. The angry headline, the careless insult, the neighbor's new car, the endless, scrolling, manufactured dissatisfaction that the world is only too happy to supply. Epictetus told his students to pay attention to their impressions the way a night watchman pays attention to who comes to the door. Every thought that arrives is asking to be let in. Every impression is knocking, and most people open the door to all of them, indiscriminately, letting in whatever shows up, never once asking whether this thought serves them, whether this is something they want living inside them, whether this is the color they want their soul to take. The seventh training is the watching itself. It is the simple, difficult discipline of noticing where your mind goes when you let go of the reins. Not judging it harshly, not spiraling into shame about it, just noticing, catching the drift, seeing with honest eyes that you have spent the last 20 minutes rehearsing an argument with someone who is not even in the room, or cataloguing the ways your life falls short of someone else's, or running a loop of worry about a thing you cannot currently do anything about, and then gently turning the mind back, the way you would turn a child back from the edge of something. Not with violence, not with self-attack, just a steady, repeated redirection, again and again, not to the thing that weakens you, to the thing that builds you. Marcus did this constantly. The whole of his meditations is a man catching his own mind in the act of drifting and turning it back. Again and again and again, he never finished the work. That is the part people miss. He wrote those notes to himself for years, the same lessons, the same reminders, the same corrections, because the mind does not get fixed once and stay fixed. It drifts. It always drifts. The training is not arriving at a place where you no longer have to watch. The training is the watching, for life. The watchman never gets to stop watching. But here is the quiet reward. A mind that is watched becomes a mind that drifts less far before you catch it. The loops get shorter. The grievances lose their grip a little faster. The comparison still arrives, but you recognize it sooner, and you let it knock, and you do not open the door. Over time, slowly, the soul takes on a different color. Not because you forced it, because you stopped feeding it the things that were darkening it. Part 10. The eighth training. Choose your company. The Stoics taught that a man is shaped, slowly and without his consent, by the people he spends his hours among, and that nothing erodes a built mind faster than the steady company of those who are tearing theirs down. This one is uncomfortable, and it is supposed to be, because it asks you to look honestly at something most people would rather not examine. Who are you actually around? Not in the abstract, not the people you would name if someone asked you to list your influences, the people whose words are actually in your ears, day after day, ordinary hour after ordinary hour, because those are the people building your mind, whether you chose them for that purpose or not. Seneca was blunt about this in a way that still stings. He told his friend Lucilius to associate with those who would make a better man of him, and to welcome those whom he himself could improve. Because the process, he said, is mutual. Men learn while they teach. The exchange goes both ways, always. You are never just in a room with people. You are being shaped by them, and shaping them in 1,000 small, invisible ways, every time you open your mouth and every time you listen. And the reverse of that is the part nobody wants to hear. If you spend your hours among people who are cynical, who mock the idea of trying, who treat every ambition as naive, and every discipline as a pose, and every sincere effort as something to be quietly ridiculed, then no amount of private reading and journaling is going to hold against that current. You cannot build a mind in the evening that you spend all day tearing down in company. The hours win. They always win. The steady drip of who you are around will wear a groove in you that your good intentions cannot fill back in. The Stoics were not telling people to become hermits. That is the easy misreading. Seneca lived in the world, in the brutal political world of imperial Rome, surrounded by people who would eventually engineer his death. Marcus governed an empire full of flatterers and schemers and men who wanted things from him. They did not withdraw people. What they did was something harder and more deliberate. They chose, where they could, who got access to the inside of their lives. And where they could not choose, they kept a kind of guard up, a clear-eyed awareness of what a given person was doing to them, so that the influence could not work on them unnoticed. That is the 8th training. Not cutting everyone off who is struggling, which would be cruelty disguised as discipline, but becoming conscious, fully conscious, of who is actually building you and who is actually wearing you down, of which conversations leave you steadier and which ones leave you smaller, of whose presence makes the good things in you more available, and whose presence reliably summons the worst, and then doing something about it. Not dramatically. You do not need a confrontation or a clean break or a speech. You just need to start adjusting where your hours go. A little more time with the people who pull you upward. A little less with the ones who do not. More attention to the voices that make the building easier, less to the ones that make it feel pointless. It is not about judging anyone. It is about the simple recognition that you are being made, every day, by your company, and that you might as well have a say in what you are being made into. Epictetus warned that if you consort with someone covered in dirt, you can hardly avoid getting a little grimy yourself. He was not being a snob. He was describing physics. Proximity transfers, always. The only question is whether you have chosen with open eyes what is close enough to transfer. Choose it. Quietly, without announcement, without making it anyone else's business, but choose it. Because the mind you are building does not get built in isolation. It gets built in the company you keep, in the words you let in the 1,000 unguarded exchanges that you barely notice and that are shaping you the whole time. The forge has other people standing around it. Some of them are tending the fire. Some of them are putting it out. Know which is which. Part 11. The 9th training. Do not wait to feel ready. The Stoics taught that the feeling of readiness is not what precedes right action, but what follows it, and that the man who waits to feel prepared before he acts will wait his entire life. Here is a trap that catches even people who understand everything else. They read all of this, they nod along, they feel the truth of it, and then they decide they will begin the training once they feel ready for it, once life calms down, once the current crisis passes, once they have more time, more energy, more of whatever they have told themselves they are missing. They are waiting for a feeling, and the feeling is never going to come. The Stoics had no patience for this, because they understood something about the order of things that most people get backwards. You do not feel ready and then act. You act and the readiness follows. The feeling is downstream of the doing, not upstream of it. The man standing at the edge of the hard conversation does not feel brave and then have it. He has it, badly, with his voice shaking, and the bravery is the residue left behind afterward. The discipline does not begin once you feel disciplined. It begins when you do the thing, despite feeling nothing of the kind. Epictetus put this in terms that leave no room to hide. He said, "Do not explain your philosophy. Embody it." He was talking to students who loved to discuss the ideas, debate the principles, admire the logic, and somehow never quite get around to living any of it. He saw clearly that the discussion had become a substitute for the practice, that talking about the building had become a way of avoiding the building. And he found it almost contemptible, because he knew where it led. To a person full of beautiful principles and an empty, untrained mind, a person who knew everything about resilience and had built none of it, the 9th training is the refusal to wait. It is the decision made now, today, in whatever imperfect and unready state you currently find yourself, to begin. Not when it is convenient, not when the conditions are right, not when you feel like the kind of person who does this. Now, in the resistance, in the not feeling like it. Because the not feeling like it is not an obstacle to the training. It is the training. The whole point is learning to act from your principles rather than your moods, and you cannot learn that on a day when your moods happen to agree with your principles. You can only learn it on a day like most days. A day when you do not want to. A day exactly like this one. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, in the cold dark of an early morning when he did not want to get out of bed, a passage that has outlived empires precisely because it is so ordinary. He reminded himself that he was not made for pleasure and comfort, but for work, for the function a human being is meant to perform, and that the ant and the bird and the bee all rise to do their work without complaint. So why should he, a man, lie there resisting his? This is an emperor, the most powerful man in the world, and he is having the exact argument with himself that you have every morning, and he is losing it the same way you do, and then winning it anyway, by getting up. Not because he felt ready, because readiness was never the requirement. Rising was so do not wait, that is the whole of it. The window you keep telling yourself will open later does not open later. It is open now, narrowly, the way it is always open, and it asks only that you step through it in the unready state you are in. The training does not require a better version of you to begin. It requires this version, the tired one, the uncertain one, the one who does not feel like it, that one. Starting now, Part 12, the 10th training, make peace with what you cannot control. The Stoics taught that nearly all human suffering comes from the same single error, the attempt to control what was never ours to control, and that the entire discipline begins with learning to tell the difference. This is the one the Stoics built everything else on top of. If there is a foundation under all of it, a single stone the whole structure rests on, it is this. There are things in your power, and there are things not in your power, and almost all of your misery comes from confusing the two. Epictetus opened his entire teaching with this. Not somewhere in the middle, not as one principle among many. First, before anything else, he said that some things are up to us and some things are not up to us. Up to us are our opinions, our impulses, our desires, our aversions. In a word, the things we ourselves do. Not up to us are our bodies, our property, our reputations, the offices we hold, in a word, the things we do not do. And he said that the whole of a person's freedom or slavery is decided by whether they understand this and live inside it, or whether they spend their lives furiously trying to command things that were never going to obey them. Look honestly at what eats most of your peace, and you will find that almost all of it lives on the wrong side of that line. What other people think of you, not in your control, whether your effort is recognized, not in your control, whether the outcome you work toward actually arrives, not in your control, not fully, not ever, no matter how hard you work or how much you deserve it. The weather on the day that mattered, the decision someone else made, the traffic, the diagnosis, the economy, the 1,000 turning gears of a universe that was running long before you arrived and will keep running long after, indifferent to your preferences, deaf to your demands. And yet this is where people pour their energy, into the uncontrollable, into the relentless, exhausting, doomed project of trying to make the world arrange itself the way they need it to. They lie awake managing outcomes they cannot touch. They burn whole years resenting things that were never going to bend. They tie their entire sense of whether they are okay to variables that a stranger, or a market, or a body, or pure chance gets the final say over. And then they wonder why peace never comes. Peace never comes because they are trying to build it on ground they do not own. The 10th training is the slow, deliberate work of taking your energy back from all of that and returning it to the one place it actually has power. Your judgments, your responses, your effort. your conduct. What you do with the hand you were dealt, rather than which cards you were dealt. The Stoics did not teach indifference to the world. That is the lazy misreading. They taught full, total engagement with the part of the world that was actually yours to engage, and a clean, freeing release of the part that was not. Marcus Aurelius worked this constantly. He would do everything in his power, everything, the full weight of an emperor's effort, and then he would let the result go, because the result was in the hands of the gods, or fortune, or the nature of things, and pretending otherwise was not strength. It was delusion. He gave the world his action, and kept for himself his peace, and he understood that the two only stay separate if you guard the line between them with everything you have. Here is the strange gift hidden inside this training. It sounds like resignation, and it turns out to be the opposite. When you stop spending yourself on the uncontrollable, you suddenly have enormous resources for the controllable. The energy that was leaking out into worry and resentment, and the management of other people's opinions, comes flooding back into the only place it can do any good. You become more effective, not less, because you are finally aiming all of yourself at the targets you can actually hit. The man who has made peace with what he cannot control is not passive. He is the most dangerous kind of active there is. Focused, undivided, spending nothing on the impossible and everything on the real. Part 13. The 11th training. Remember that this has all happened before. The Stoics taught that there is nothing happening to you that has not happened to countless others before you, and that the feeling of being singularly afflicted is itself one of the heaviest and least necessary burdens a person carries. There is a particular kind of suffering that comes not from the hard thing itself, but from the belief that the hard thing is uniquely yours, that no one has felt quite this, that your loss is somehow more total, your unfairness more pointed, your circumstance more impossible than what others have had to bear. It is one of the most natural feelings in the world, and it is almost always an illusion. A heavy, isolating, completely unnecessary illusion. Marcus Aurelius gave himself a remedy for this that is almost startling in its bluntness. He told himself to consider the lives of those who came before, the emperors, the generals, the ordinary men and women, all of whom faced what he was facing, all of whom feared what he feared, all of whom are now gone, their crises long resolved into dust, their unbearable circumstances now nothing more than a line in a history nobody reads. Everything you are going through, he reminded himself, has been gone through. The same griefs, the same betrayals, the same sleepless nights and impossible decisions and losses that felt like the end of the world. Whole oceans of human beings have stood exactly where you are standing, felt exactly what you are feeling, and the wave closed over all of them, and the world kept turning. This sounds, at first, like it should make things worse, like cold comfort, or no comfort at all. It does the opposite. There is a deep and steadying relief in understanding that you are not the first, that this road, however dark it feels under your own feet, is a road, a worn one, walked by millions. The fear that no one could possibly understand, that you are alone in a way no human has ever been alone, lifts a little when you realize that the human condition is, at its core, this. That suffering is not a malfunction in your particular life. It is the shared inheritance of everyone who has ever lived. You are not being singled out. You are being initiated into the oldest and most universal experience there is. Seneca leaned on this constantly when he wrote to people in grief. He did not tell them their pain was small. He told them their pain was human, ancient, shared by every person who had ever loved and lost, and that there was a strange dignity in taking your place in that long line rather than standing outside it, insisting your case was different. The mother who lost her child, he reminded them, was joined by every mother who had ever lost a child, stretching back to the beginning of people. The grief did not shrink, but the loneliness inside it did, and the loneliness often is the part that breaks you. Not the loss itself, but the conviction that you carry it alone. The 11th training is the deliberate practice of locating yourself in that long line. When the hard thing comes and the mind begins its old whisper, "Why me? Why this? Why now? No one understands," you answer it with the truth. Everyone. This. Always. And everyone has understood because everyone has been here. You reach in the worst moments, not for the feeling of being uniquely cursed, but for the quiet companionship of the countless who came before and carried it, and were, in their carrying, exactly as human and as frightened and as ultimately capable as you are right now. It does not make the weight lighter. Nothing makes the weight lighter. But it changes who you are while you carry it. From a person alone under something monstrous and singular, to a person taking their turn at a burden the whole species has taken its turn at, and survived, and even, sometimes, been deepened by. You are not the exception. You never were, and there is more freedom in that than the lonely mind would ever guess. Part 14. The 12th training. Use the thought of death to sharpen life. The Stoics taught that the awareness of death is not morbid but clarifying, and that the man who keeps his own mortality close does not live in fear, but in a kind of fierce and grateful attention that most people never reach. This is the one that frightens people off before they understand it, so understand it first. The Stoics talked about death constantly, not because they were gloomy, not because they were obsessed with endings. The opposite. They talked about death because they had discovered that the steady awareness of it was the single most powerful tool there is for actually living, and that the people who hide from the thought of dying are, almost always, the people least awake to the fact that they are alive. Memento mori, they called it. Remember that you will die. They kept it close, deliberately, the way you might keep a sharp tool within reach, not to wound themselves with it, to stay sharp. Because here is what the thought of death actually does. When you stop flinching from it and let it sit beside you, it strips away instantly and without mercy everything that does not matter. The grudge you have been nursing, the status you have been chasing, the slight you have been replaying, the endless deferral of the things you actually care about into a someday that you have been quietly assuming is guaranteed. Hold the thought of your own ending in your hand for even a moment, honestly, and watch how fast the trivial reveals itself as trivial, and the precious reveals itself as precious. Seneca wrote that we are mistaken when we look forward to death, because death is not only ahead of us but behind us, that everything which has already passed is in death's possession. Every hour you have already lived is already gone, already finished, already beyond recall. Which means, he said, that the only life you actually have is the part still in front of you, and that the part still in front of you is shorter than you think and shrinking with every breath. He did not write this to depress his reader. He wrote it to wake him up, to make him stop wasting the irreplaceable, to make him understand that the casual squandering of an afternoon, of a conversation, of an ordinary day, is not the harmless thing it pretends to be. It is the spending of something that does not come back. The 12th training is to let death do its sharpening work, on purpose, while you are still well and the matter still feels abstract, not to dwell in dread, to borrow, deliberately, the clarity that the dying almost always report finding too late. Ask the people at the actual end what they learned, and they say the same things over and over, with a consistency that should stop us all in our tracks. They wish they had not cared so much what others thought. They wish they had let themselves be happier. They wish they had stayed closer to the people who mattered. They wish they had not waited. None of it is a surprise. All of it was available the whole time, free, To anyone willing to remember before the end that the end was real, Marcus told himself plainly that he could leave life right now and to let that determine what he did and said and thought. Not in panic. As a governor, as the single most reliable filter there is for whether a thing is worth your one and only life. Would you spend an afternoon of a finite existence on this resentment? If you truly held the finiteness in mind, would you let this grievance keep its claws in you? Would you keep postponing the call, the work, the forgiveness, the joy, if you actually believed, in your body, that the supply of afternoons was running out? You would not. The dying do not. And you do not have to wait until you are dying to think like someone who knows the truth that the dying finally cannot avoid. This is the strange and beautiful turn at the center of the whole practice. The thought that seems like it should make life smaller makes it enormous. The awareness that should breed fear breeds, instead, a ferocious attention to the hour in front of you. You stop sleepwalking. You stop deferring. You start tasting the ordinary day for what it secretly is, which is the rarest and most fleeting thing in the universe, a moment of being alive, here now, before the door closes. Remember that you will die, and then finally awake to what that means, begin to actually live. One last thing. There is a question worth sitting with before this ends. If life tested you seriously tomorrow, not an inconvenience, not a bad day, a real test, would your mind hold? Be honest. Not with anyone else. With yourself. Most people, if they are really honest, feel a quiet unease when they sit with that question. Not certainty in either direction, just uncertainty, a vague sense that they have not really been tested yet, or that the tests they have faced rattled them more than they would like to admit, or that they have been getting by on circumstance and luck and the general cooperativeness of life, and they are not entirely sure what happens when that runs out. That unease is important. That unease is the right response to a real question. And here is the thing about everything you have just read. 12 trainings, 12 disciplines the Stoics used to build a mind that life could not break. It can start to feel like a lot, like a curriculum, like one more demanding system to fail at, on top of all the others you have started and abandoned. But that is not what it is. Look at them again, and you will see they are not 12 separate things. They are 12 doors into the same room. Voluntary discomfort and the thought of death are the same lesson approached from two directions. Watching where your mind goes and catching the story before it catches you are the same muscle worked two ways. Sitting with uncertainty and making peace with what you cannot control are, in the end, the same surrender. You are not learning 12 things. You are learning one thing 12 times, from 12 angles, until it finally goes deep enough to hold. And that one thing is this. The mind is not given. The mind is built. Everything else is detail. The Stoics knew the unease you feel sitting with the hard question because they felt it too. That is why they trained. Not because they were braver than you, though some of them were brave. Not because they were colder than you, though that is the caricature people reach for. They trained because they respected the difficulty enough to prepare for it. Because they understood, with a clarity that most people spend their whole lives avoiding, that the mind is not naturally resilient. It is made resilient, deliberately, consistently, unglamorously, over years of ordinary days. The way anything real is built, Marcus Aurelius trained his mind for years before he needed it, and then he needed it. The plague swept through Rome and emptied whole cities. The wars on the frontier never seemed to end. His friends betrayed him. His children died, one after another, in an age that buried children casually. His own son grew into exactly the kind of man he had spent a lifetime trying not to become, and there was nothing his wisdom or his power could do to stop it. By every external measure, the man had earned the right to break, and the mind held, Not perfectly, not without grief or doubt, or the very human experience of standing at the absolute edge of what a person can carry. But it held. He remained to the end, recognizably himself. He kept getting up in the cold dark and doing the work, because the work was what he was for, and because he had built, in the good years, the thing he would need in the bad ones. That is the entire promise of this philosophy. Read it slowly, because it is smaller and more honest than the promises most people are selling. It is not a life without difficulty. The Stoics never promised that, and neither will I. It is not a mind that never feels fear, never grieves, never wavers. That is not strength, that is numbness, and the Stoics had no use for it. The promise is this: a mind that when the pressure comes has something in it, something built, something real, something that was put there on purpose in the ordinary days, when the stakes were low enough that you could have skipped it, and no one, least of all you, would have known the difference. You can still build it. That is the part to hold on to. Not that you should have started earlier, though you should have, and so should everyone, and so did even the people who started earliest. Not that you are behind, though maybe you are. None of that matters now. The window is not in the past, and it is not in some better prepared future. The window is now. It is always now. It is the only place the window has ever been. Every ordinary day is a day of training for the extraordinary one that is coming. Every small act of discipline, every story you decline to tell yourself, every minute you sit inside the not knowing without flinching, every loss you meet with an open hand, every time you turn your wandering mind gently back, is a brick in a wall you will one day be desperately glad is there. Seneca said it better than anyone ever has. He said, "This is our great mistake, to think we look forward to death, when most of death has already passed us by. Whatever time has gone is owned by death already. Whatever time has gone is owned by death already." Sit with that. It sounds bleak until it turns, and then it is the opposite of bleak, because if the past belongs to death, then the time you have left does not. It is yours, free and clear, unspent, right now, today, this hour, the one you are in, so train the mind. Not for some polished future version of yourself who will finally have it together. For the person you are actually going to need to be, in the actual life you are actually living, maybe sooner than you think, maybe much later, but certainly because the difficulty is coming. It comes for everyone. It has never once skipped anyone. The only open question, the only one that was ever yours to decide, is whether you will meet it built or unbuilt. Ready or not, if something here settled somewhere in you, some weight, some recognition, some quiet sense that it is time to take this more seriously than you have been, do not let it pass. Do not file it away as an interesting thing you read once. That feeling is not the lesson. That feeling is the training, starting. The discomfort of being honestly seen is the first rep. You are already in it. You started the moment you let the question land instead of looking away. You do not need a plan. You do not need a system or an app or the perfect morning routine or a fresh start on Monday. You need none of the things people reach for so they can feel like they are beginning without ever having to begin. You need only to decide that the ordinary day in front of you, this unremarkable day, this one, is worth showing up for fully, that the small moments of discipline matter because they are the only moments there are, that the mind is worth building now before you need it, while the building is still a choice and not yet a desperate too-late scramble in the middle of the storm. Start there. Just there. One ordinary day, met fully, then another. That is the whole of it. That is everything the Stoics knew, compressed into the only instruction that has ever actually changed anyone. Begin, now, as you are. If you made it all the way to the end, drop the word "ready" in the comments, just so I know you were here, and that this reached you. See you next time.